This week, What the Papers Say is presented by Isabel Hilton.
Good evening. It was a sad week for fans of the magazine The Modern Review, dispatched to the great recycling bin in the sky.
That's all, folks.
The end of the affair
Was how the magazine's diminutive editor, Toby Young, described the finale. A nation mourns, or at least 10,000 people, not all of whom were close relatives of those involved, who were still buying the magazine when it went fut. The diminutive circulation didn't stop Fleet Street from covering the closure in the kind of detail normally reserved for a marital tiff among the Windsors.
Modern story of love, hate and revenge shuts magazine.
Old-fashioned feud ends Modern Review.
Burchill vows to destroy editor who sank her magazine.
As you may be starting to realise,
The end of the affair
wasn't by mutual consent. The Burchill referred to is one Julie Burchill, a highly paid and highly famous person. So we all want to know about it, don't we? Well, not quite all. Step forward the sourpuss of Sheffield, a Mr. Dave Godin, who finally cracked and complained to the Independent.
I'm amazed at the amount of column inches you've wasted writing about Julie Burchill and the emotional crises of her superficial coterie. Is any of it of any real interest outside of the Groucho Club? Also, has it occurred to you that many of us might choose to buy the Independent precisely because Julie Burchill doesn't write for it?
There, you see, you do care. Groan on, Mr. Godin, but nobody's listening. For the benefit of Mr. Godin and the more than 55 million other people who unaccountably don't seem to have bought the Modern Review, here's a brief guide to the dramatis persona so far. Miss Julie Burchill, middle-aged enfant terrible, ex-wife of two and mother of two sons, is a newspaper columnist, famous for her nastiness in print and her timidity in person. As Joanna Coles once told us in The Guardian...
So what says she? If she has had to write some stupid, sometimes offensive and unpleasant things to get there. That lesbians, for example, should be sent to concentration camps.
Come, Julie, that's going a bit far.
That she would rather have terminal cancer than be fat. Naturally, she retracted this remark after putting on weight.
Naturally, but she's not all bad. According at least to John Little in The Independent, Miss Burchill is...
a woman who called Camille Paglia,
A raving bull dyke.
but whose shoulder pads are permanently soaked with the tears of friends in need.
Then there's Mr. Tony Parsons, famous for being her first husband.
It was, by all accounts, an incessantly turbulent liaison in deepest, darkest Essex, and one which resulted in a son, Bobby, whom she rarely sees.
And Mr. Cosmo Landesman, famous for being her second husband. Toby Young has never been either of Miss Burchill's husbands, though he hasn't entirely ruled it out as a possible career move.
I always said to her, I'll be your fourth husband, but not your third.
That's all you need to know, really, except for...
The lovely crop-haired Charlotte Raven, who writes for Burchill's magazine, The Modern Review.
Of whom more later. As befits a maîtresse of postmodern irony, Miss Burchill views the past as another country. So what she said yesterday has no bearing on what she says today, or might say tomorrow. In her latest personal makeover, Miss Burchill abandoned husband Mark II to move in with Miss Raven, from which we might guess that a radical revision of the Burchill position on what she has termed fat dykes has taken place. Mr. Young is a great admirer of Miss Burchill's latest discarded husband, Cosmo Landesman.
He is incredibly good-looking, incredibly charming, incredibly supportive. He's just the husband from heaven. To throw him over for Charlotte Raven is just mad.
So what's your explanation, Mr. Young?
The whole thing is most peculiar and a complete bolt from the blue. Julie in the past has exhibited no signs of lesbianism at all. She has written pieces attacking lipstick lesbians and designer dykes and has always bashed gays.
Metropolitan Police, please note. Oh, and Miss Burchill would like one or two other offences to be taken into consideration.
I was the best shoplifter in my year.
Miss Burchill had lost faith in her former friend's talents as editor.
The man is 31 years old. He's bald as a coot. He's very tired. He should not be running a popular magazine.
She said. Though with sales at 10,000, Miss Burchill should rest easy. Popular hardly seems the word. It didn't stop Mr. Young from collecting plaudits, some of which he thoughtfully reproduced for us in the final issue.
What they said about us.
Nothing has happened in America for a long time that is comparable to the Modern Review. I used to lie awake at night waiting for these things.
J. McInerney.
The Washington Post seems to be suffering from sleep deprivation, too.
If you're an Anglophilic cult stud, you'll find this mag supremely entertaining.
The Washington Post.
Then again, if you were one, you probably wouldn't want to tell the newsagent. So with all this praise, why did it fail? Neil Ferguson, writing in The Independent, has his own theory.
The possibility that the Modern Review folded because it was a bad magazine has scarcely been discussed.
Burchill said it over and over again, and even Toby Young admits.
Few people outside the office ever praised the magazine.
Actually, I found the final issue packed with useful tips, like this on page 17.
10 reasons not to take cocaine.
Now, isn't that the kind of thing you might want to cut out and keep? My personal favourite is reason number 8.
At the end of the evening, you cannot properly operate the bottom jaw. This has several unpleasant consequences, only one of which is inability to form words.
From which we can safely assume none of the leading protagonists were great consumers of the stuff. Their ability to form words, if only about themselves and each other, remains triumphantly unimpaired. Though I'm a bit worried about the advertising manager. There's this worrying admission from the late editor.
Over the years, our advertising has been looked after by Wallace Kingston, a crack salesman.
Now, I ask you, was that wise?
A crack salesman who used to be at Marxism Today.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Kingston. That would be the late Marxism Today, would it?
And now runs a sales agency whose main client is the Modern Review.
Grief-stricken as I was by the demise of the Modern Review, I couldn't help but notice that the rest of the week's news seemed to be dominated by people called Scott. One, Sir Nicholas, the Conservative member for Chelsea, and the other, Lord Justice Scott, who seems to be giving that charming Mr. Wargrave, the Agriculture Secretary, a hard time. Despite the observation of
Dame Elaine Kellett-Bowman,
reported in the Times that there was
no more honourable man in politics.
Sir Nicholas, whose paralysingly safe seat in Chelsea is being redrawn under boundary review, had been glad-handing for the party.
He had spent 2 hours at the £10 a head fundraising soiree at a garden shop in Sydney Street.
That's the sort of hard work we expect from our members of Parliament, and Sir Nicholas had clearly given it his all. How else are we to explain what happened next? Sir Nicholas, according to witnesses, said his farewell, shook a few hands, and leapt into his bright red Volvo, and then...
According to police, the car hit a parked Volvo in front, which then shunted into a Jaguar 3 feet away, sandwiching 3-year-old Thibaut Perriard and his father Yves in between. Bystanders released the pair by pulling the 2 cars apart.
Oh dear, I expect Sir Nicholas helped, did he? Not according to the News of the World.
He vanished into the night, leaving a toddler sandwiched between 2 vehicles.
Well, that wasn't very nice. Just think what that toddler could have done to the paintwork.
Sir Nicholas
61.
was traced to a nearby address, breathalyzed, arrested, and later released on police bail.
The papers were full of speculation that this regrettable incident might somehow have damaged the honourable member's political career.
Crash Shame Tory is set to quit.
It could be the end.
If it is proved that he did walk away from the scene of an accident, he may be asked to resign.
But his female companion on the night displayed a robust grasp of reality and put the whole thing in the right perspective when she shouted to the assembled throng.
What are you worrying about? The child's not dead. He's not even English.
Well, there you are, then. The identity of this paragon of tact was itself the subject of some speculation. Was it Lady Scott, as the father of the toddler first assumed?
She just said...
I have lived here all my life. You're a frog.
And was he a frog? No, according to Today.
They were a Swiss couple and were clearly very upset, but she was calling them
Scum.
and saying,
Go back to where you come from.
I do hope it wasn't Lady Scott. I like to think an MP's wife would know the nationality of the people she was insulting. According to a witness interviewed by the Sunday Express, she was...
A sophisticated woman
I could tell that by the tone of her remarks.
in a bright green suit with shoulder pads.
Hang on a minute. Abusive and wearing shoulder pads. Were those shoulder pads wet? Could it have been Julie Burchill? Apparently not. The mystery was soon solved. Sir Nicholas's fair, silver-tongued companion was his secretary, Patricia Sill-Johnson. I'm happy to report that Mrs. Sill-Johnson continued to display her mettle, refusing to apologise to the frog.
I don't want to talk about it. Why does he want an apology?
Fortunately, Mr. Sill-Johnson backed his wife's principled stand.
Her husband, Stuart, swore at a reporter. He shouted,
You little harassing! You should be ashamed of yourselves!
And so say all of us. I only wish that sort of grit under fire had been shown by Mr. Wargrave when Lord Justice Scott came gunning for him. According to part of his draft report, which was leaked to the BBC, Lord Justice Scott had the impertinence to suggest that Mr. Wargrave had been less than truthful about British policy on arms sales to Iraq.
Scott accuses Walgrave.
You lied, Minister.
The damning verdict.
I've never heard the like. Doesn't he know who Mr. Wargrave is? Fortunately, the Times has its debrettes to hand.
Genuine toff, forced to fight for his honour.
And by a chap who rides a bicycle, too.
He is the younger son of the 12th Earl Waldegrave, who died last month. His ancestors have governed since the 14th century, and he is the only cabinet minister with whom the Prince of Wales is said to feel totally at ease.
Now, that's the kind of stuff you need to know in a situation like this. So I expect he's pretty highly thought of, is he?
After a near-disastrous performance during the 1992 general election campaign as Health Secretary,